So in this segment, we're going to be. I'm not going to do a ton of these kind of LBC callers and stuff, just because they're normie people. But when they make a point that's kind of either good or really bad, we'll kind of discuss it because it's worth doing. This argument of Starmer needs to be given a chance, and look at what Boris Johnson did. I think it's a dumb argument, but we'll discuss that in a minute.
I mean, it's sort of a bit like Brexit all over again. The narrative is out. Starmer's the same as the others, and he's hypocritical because he promised he was going to change everything. And when you turn around and say to these people, he hasn't broken any rules.
Again, this argument of he hasn't broken any rules is just stupid because there is legal right and there's moral right, and ultimately, when you look at certain gifts that were given by things like the FA, when you've got things like a football regulator potentially coming in, it looks very iffy as to what your motivations are at that point and how you're going to implement that, if you're going to implement it at all. Money taints things. You've got this whole carbon capture thing, which effectively is a bung to, fossil fuel companies. And you had a donation of £4 million from a hedge fund that makes money from fossil fuels. It looks very fishy at that point. The optics alone look completely awful.
It just doesn't cut through because they've made up their mind, and it's at the moment it's immovable. And you say, well, look, he did a really good job after the riots. It was really a relief to have.
Did he do a good job? He you had people like Yvette Cooper saying some people have very strong views, but they don't go out rioting. Did he do a good job in dealing with the riots? I'm not really sure about that.
Someone statesmanly, actually making things, happen and work and sort that mess out.
Well, the people who deserve the credits really of dealing with the riots are, first of all, the police, who managed to try and suppress them as best they could, despite the fact that they didn't have the numbers or the equipment, and also the counter-protesters. The counter-protesters are the ones who really stopped the riots because the racists realised that they ain't got the numbers to actually do any damage because this lot are a bunch of cowards. What they wanted is hundreds, maybe thousands of people to turn up at these riots so they can really cause damage. But ultimately what happened was not a lot of them turned up, and you had, essentially hundreds of counter-protesters in the towns they live in. In my town, there were hundreds of counter-protesters. And that's what stopped, I think that's what stopped the riots in the end, really. It wasn't really much to do with Starmer, to be honest with you.
But now it's all about his clothes and his glasses. And it just, at the moment, I can't see that that's going to change. Even though you say, well, Boris Johnson had all of that wallpaper and all of that free
and
food.
this is why you mentioned Brexit, because it's a bit like shouting Project Fear with no evidence whatsoever, as opposed to shouting, look, here's...
When you look at the difference between the wallpaper and the glasses and stuff, first of all, there's the amount. But secondly, Boris Johnson didn't declare it. Those are the big differences between the two. We still don't know what Lord Brownlow wanted with the donations he gave to Boris Johnson. Just like we still don't know what Lord Ali wants with the donations he made to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party.
Here's what will happen if we leave, and here's my working, and here's the proof, and then being called a liar.
Yeah. And the difference is when Johnson took over, we all knew it was going to be a car crash, but I think we let him have... he had COVID, but...
We? Who's we? I was on the channel making videos day after day about how crap he was. We? Nah, not we. You, by the sounds of it. You didn't do much, but what was to be expected? He had a huge majority. At that point, what could you do? Because ultimately, people in the media, people like me on YouTube, all we can do is shout into a microphone and be angry about stuff and hope other people watch and be angry about stuff. But there's really not much we can do, especially when you had ministers constantly ducking interviews. What were the public supposed to do? Ultimately, the British public fumbled and elected a complete clown. Sorry, let's say he's not the clown, he's the entire circus. And that's what happened to the country. We got turned into a massive laughingstock. We became the joke of Europe.
But we let him have that chance to get on with it. You think, well, the country's voted for it, so we've got to go with this. But that just hasn't happened with Starmer, right from...
Starmer talked about bringing in change, getting rid of the sleaze, and then we realised he hasn't really gotten rid of the sleaze, he's embraced the sleaze.
In the beginning,
the politics of service is the politics of self-service now.
They've gone for him.
Were you surprised by that?
What, that they've gone for him?
Yeah.
Well, no,
well, and also,
I know what the right-wing press are like.
No, well, I do too. It's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but I'm surprised how weak the... What's the word? How weak the gruel is. I really am. I know how tabloid journalism works. I know that portraying someone as being in receipt of something that you're not in receipt of yourself. But he's
trying to argue this is the politics of envy. Like, we're mad Starmer got free suits and glasses. Like, no, you're in government, mate. When people give you donations, normally there's some sort of expectation there. We've seen that in American politics more than anything. You know, when certain companies give donations to politicians, it's for certain political aspirations to happen.
The confidence with which these blowhards and these Boris Johnson fanboys pretend that what Starmer has done is in any way comparable.
I mean, it's not about being comparable. You know, both things can be bad without being equally as bad. You know, this kind of false equivalence, well, you know, oh, Boris Johnson didn't declare it on his register of interest, and also he took hundreds of thousands of pounds more, therefore Keir Starmer is okay. Like, are you stupid, my guy? Like, genuinely, like, did someone drop a weight plate on your head? Like, it's not, people aren't making the comparison they are equally bad. People are making the point that both things are bad, not necessarily equally. One could be a 9 out of 10 bad on the scale, and the other could be a 6 out of 10 bad on the scale. It does not make them equal, but it makes them both issues that come from the fundamental problem, which is British politicians taking donations and bribes from people. That's the problem.
Alone worse than what Boris Johnson did. I guess I'm always surprised by the...
Well, you know, I'm not. We go to our CEO of surprises.
Hey, I'm not surprised.
But, you know, ultimately, it's this. You know, this is what Alistair Campbell talked about. You know, Labour governments are held to much higher standards than Tory governments. This is something Labour goons just fail to understand. Person after person, commenter after commenter. Like, how do you not get that the public hold Labour to a higher standard, especially when you made a crusade out of going after sleaze, especially when you talked about change? You know, you talked about you're not going to be like that. You talked about the politics of service, not self-service. So ultimately, you can't make the point of people being unfair to Labour purely because of the fact you said you'd be different, but you were the same. It doesn't make sense, guy. You're meant to be intelligent. You're meant to be LBC's top guy. But ultimately, you're a clown just like the rest of them. You know, there's not the difference between this guy and the right-wing press is he's slightly better at spinning stuff because he doesn't have to spin as much, because the Labour government aren't as bad as the Tory one. That's it. You know, his spin is equally terrible, honestly. Just stop constantly trying to defend the Labour Party day after day and just do your job in the media, which is to hold the powerful people accountable. And if you can't do that, just go join the Labour Party in their comms team, because God knows they need the help, and leave your radio show to someone else who's actually going to try and hold the job accountable, because there are much better LBC presenters than you, my guy, who should have that time slot, because they actually want to do their job properly, rather than just trying to be a cheerleader for Team Red. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.